Hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the Wheel of Time versus Halo. Which adaptation is better? Not really exactly what we're going to be talking about, more about retelling and adaptation and what it means to the heart of these stories, and are these adaptations or retellings really capturing that core essence of these stories and how much it matters to stick to source material or diverge a little bit. I will give the caveat that Halo is a video game, and especially with that first game, you're able to have a lot of wiggle room, and you also have all the expanded books, and you have Halo Reach, which is a prequel, which I think they're going to implement a lot into this first season. I don't even know if we're going to see a Halo this first season, maybe at the end, but for Halo fans who know, we'll probably see what happens at the end of Reach at the end of this season. And then Wheel of Time obviously is a book series, and we've had book series in the past be adapted and be good shows, which is like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, right? So seeing something that's a little bit different and adapted in more of a retelling rather than sticking closer to the source material is upsetting to fans. But I'm going to sort of talk about these both of these shows and why one works and why one doesn't, sort of give you that in the upfront, and then I'm going to expound on sort of what I talked about. So my initial thoughts is basically I really like Halo's adaptation because there's a lot more to work with, and the elements and human elements that are talked about don't really get introduced until like the third, fourth, and fifth games in Halo, and they're just like up front immediately in season 1, and it's a lot richer and deeper story with all the conflicts going on, where the same could sort of be said for Wheel of Time, but in the books you make such an image in your head of what you see with these scenes that are very crucial to you, and when they adapt and change the story, you're not able to see those crucial scenes, and that's sort of what burned me for the end of the Wheel of Time show. I still really like it, and I can separate both of them, and I'm looking forward to season 2 a lot. I'm just hoping that we get closer to seeing events that happen in the books that I just want to see, and I didn't get really any of those in this adaptation of the Wheel of Time. But with Halo, I'm more like, oh, this is so much richer. I know these characters, and they're doing this with that. It's so cool, and I sort of just want to talk about like why I think all of that. So the difference between retelling and adapting, I think they are one and the same, just with one you're a little bit more upfront with what you're doing. With the Halo adaptation, they already said that this is going to be a retelling, and it makes sense. It's a video game. It's easier to change things, but it's easier to get it wrong, and that's why a lot of video game adaptations to film or TV are really bad. The case in point with just list out a huge amount of films that are just terrible. It's sort of like an anime to live action adaptation. It just doesn't work because usually you lose the magic within that medium. There's a magic to animation, so when you take it to live action, you lose that magic. And then obviously the magic of playing the video game and what they do in their storytelling and being a part of that story yourself, you lose that magic going into a TV show. So how are you going to then keep that magic and bring it over to television or movies? And I think it's to playing at the heart of the story. And the biggest question to ask is Halo keeping its heart of its story? I think that it is. I really enjoy it. It's sticking to the heart of what it means to be human, and then also just having badass, awesome Master Chief going across just killing aliens and all this sort of stuff. Obviously, I love that. But what it means to be human, those are very sci-fi elements, obviously, with technology and the different things they're doing with the TV show, with Cortana being an actual like person, like cloning her and her still being alive, and then taking that and then using it as the AI. I don't remember in the original source material that she actually cloned herself. I thought she just like cloned her brain and made the AI, or like used her brain as a thing for the AI, but not actually making a whole other person. And it brings up other ethical questions that play to sci-fi and play to that genre and play to television and movies when it comes to that sort of genre. So that genre is just what does it mean to be human and what happens with machines and all this sort of stuff, right? And I think Halo is doing a great job at that, actually in fact doing a better job at that with this than the video games are. And the video games are like my favorite series of all time of video games. I had an original Xbox like my dad had it, and I would play Halo Combat Evolved, and I just thought that was so cool, and my uncles liked it, and I thought it was cool to all play with them, and it's like my favorite franchise of all time. So like I'm not like a Halo hater. I love Halo, and I think that, but I think the story in the TV show is better than the video games. This is coming from the guy who cried when like Cortana died in Halo 5, or didn't die, or, you know, I don't, you know, like, right, we don't actually know what's going on. Well, unless you finish the most recent game, then I guess you kind of know more of what's going on. Yeah, that's a whole other subject, but I think that it's presenting those sci-fi elements very well and being very true to the aesthetic of Halo while we're watching it on television. And then also the people in charge of making the story of Halo were upfront about it being a retelling. And that's where Halo got it right and Wheel of Time got it wrong. They should have been a little bit more upfront about this being a retelling. Granted, about a month before the show came out, or a little over a month, Brandon did say that Brandon Sanderson, the guy that finished Wheel of Time, said that this is more of another turning of the wheel. And if you read the series, you know that, like, you know, it's the Wheel of Time, so everything repeats itself. So this is another retelling of that, basically. That's essentially what he said. But the people involved with the project weren't upfront with that early on. And I get why they weren't, because that could deter a lot of hardcore fans to not watch the show. I think everyone still would have watched the show. And with people who haven't read the books, which I watched with my family, me and my dad were the only ones that read it, but I had my sisters, aunts, and uncles, and people who haven't read the books. They made sure they came over every week and we all watched it together because they really liked the show. So the show did a very good job executing its story. It just wasn't the story of the first book. And something that Wheel of Time can't play with that Halo can is that Halo can do a lot more because it is a video game, and it's not as many entries into the main story about Master Chief as there is for the Wheel of Time. Master Chief's main story, I haven't read the books, and I've only really played the video game, and vast majority of people have only played the video game, and then even more people who have never played the video game and only heard about it, and they're playing to that audience. So there's only 6 games, and the main story is really only 3 games, plus like Halo Reach, and I think they're actually playing a lot with those elements in this first season. I don't even think we'll see a Halo really until the end of the first season, and I think those who have played Reach will know probably what happens at the end of this season. But Halo has a lot of room to play with and make things richer, just go deeper and deeper with this story. And it's really fun to watch as a fan, because I'm like, ooh, they're taking that element, that person, this person, and they're like making those relationships very complicated, and all like the government and big things are all in like twisted together, the sciences. Like I said, like the core part of what they got right was the sci-fi and figuring out the human elements. And they're doing a fantastic job at that. Where Wheel of Time has got it wrong, or maybe not necessarily wrong, we're just gonna have to see in retrospect, is it's 14 books and they're only gonna be able to make 8 seasons. Where people usually look to Game of Thrones and see how like, oh, you can make that really true to the story. Well, that's because Game of Thrones was only 4 books at the time. 5th book when the series, when the TV show came out. There hasn't been a book since, and that's why the ending sort of sucks for Game of Thrones. But there's only 1 book per season. You're able to do that. With Wheel of Time, you only have 7 to 8 seasons, so you have to like do 2 books basically per season. But the advantage that Wheel of Time has is that the series is over and we know the core elements of what this story really is. And with that first book, it was really always about Rand and like seeing a story, Rand and Perrin, those were like the main sort of viewpoints. But as we branch out into the 14 books, there are thousands of named characters and POVs, and it gets huge. It's a huge story, but what Rafe is able to do is be able to concentrate all of that together. Whether he's doing a great job at that or not is left up to debate. There are some things for me that I wish I would have seen in this season, especially book scenes, that I wasn't able to get and I was disappointed by, but I'm hoping that will sort of be fixed in season 2. It could not be, you know, we'll see. I can't judge something that I haven't seen yet, but with the way that things have been trending and going, I don't know if I will, and that sort of scares me. Where with Halo, I'm like, the world is its oyster and you can do whatever you want with this thing, basic to a certain degree. I'm more talk about going deeper with the story, right? But Rafe definitely has a hard time with this sort of adaptation, because there are so many books and so many things to cut out of them to stick with the main core Emmonsfield 5, that's what they call the characters, to be able to do their stories really well. And I think what Rafe was trying to do this first season was really focus on characters we will not get as much of going on in the later seasons, or have as much or a bigger role. I'm basically talking about Matt, Perrin, and Rand. They had a much smaller role in this one, where I felt like Nynaeve and Egwene were given a little bit bigger role, and especially Moraine, where later on in the series, Egwene does stay quite relevant. Egwene and Perrin are both my favorite characters in the show, and I hope they get some pretty good spotlight, but the main contributors to the story near the end is Rand, Perrin, and Egwene, and then Matt to an extent. Nynaeve does her own sort of things, and it's very interesting, and I'm glad they're keeping her at the forefront, but I'm glad that Nynaeve has her moments here, and it'll mean a lot more when we get later on in the series, but we're probably going to start shifting focus more towards Rand and Perrin, I'm thinking, this next season. So yeah, Rafe just has a harder job than the team over at Halo, and the reason why people are in an uproar is because both of these stories are very different. The fact that I'm making these video, these are two completely different audiences, but I love these stories and I want to talk about them. But how do you think these show creators are doing adapting these? Yes, they are very different. Should we see a truer adaptation hopefully eventually down the line? Because this seems like the really big budget, so this seems like the one we're probably going to stick with for the next 50 plus years or whatever, right? I don't really know how it's going to work, but at least for another 3 decades, this is going to be the adaptation we see for our lifetimes. Are you guys satisfied with these adaptations with franchises that you love? Does it not really matter because you'll always have the video games or you'll always have the books, and and it doesn't really matter all too much of how they adapt it? I also stick in that boat a little bit. I always go, I have the magic of the books, I have the magic of the video games, and if I'm really craving it, I'm gonna go read those, or I'm gonna go play that game. But it's cool to see this adaptation to get to other people who are going to pick up the books, pick up the video games, that sort of thing, right? And the community will ultimately grow. But let me know what you guys think about this. This was sort of just a ramble and a thing I want to talk about, and seeing parallels between the adaptation of Wheel of Time and Halo, and how different they are from their source material, and whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And subscribe to be a part of the community. I love talking about fantasy. I do it every week, and I would love to have you a part of the discussion. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.